lock myself in with the units on my left, the units on my right, and the units behind me. I have to coordinate everything for it to work as designed. But if I'm just running up now and digging into my foxhole, I haven't locked in anything yet. I need time. And the Ukrainians had the initiative. And there was a risk that as Russia tried to consolidate this defensive line, that the Ukrainians would come upon them and overwhelm the Russian defenses. So Russia needed to break up the Ukrainian attack. And what they did is they shut down the electrical grid for all of eastern Ukraine and southern Ukraine. Any area that had any meaningful relationship with the battlefield got the power turned off. And in doing so, you froze the battlefield. Ukraine was no longer able to move at will. The electric trains weren't working, etc. The proof, though, that it wasn't taking the gloves off is, and I've done this during Desert Storm. I was one of the guys that was involved in the targeting of Iraq's, strategic infrastructure. When we take out a power plant, we take out a power plant. It's never going to be brought back up. You got to rebuild a whole new power plant. That's how we take out a power plant. It's not what Russia did. Russia hit the power plant, shut it off, but literally 24 hours later, the power's back on. Why? Well, the Ukrainians reestablished connectivity, rebuilt certain infrastructure, et cetera. Russia deliberately made sure that this wasn't permanent damage. Why? Special military operation, reduce casualties to civilians, reduce damage to civilian infrastructure. So they knocked out the power to freeze the battlefield, to buy the defense time to lock in. They hit a dam. They blew up a dam. They ended up flooding a river, flooding a city. Rogue is a strategic city. It's Zelensky's birthplace. A little bit of political symbolism here, but it's also where the regional command and control was. Well, you can't have too much command and control and logistics fluidity if you're fluidity, bad word, because the entire city's flooded. It's very fluid right now, but nothing's moving. And then over the river, the Ukrainians, together with a lot of NATO assistance, built a whole bunch of bridges across the river. And so you could supply the units that are on the other side of the river so they could prepare to attack the Russians. And the Russians wanted to nullify this attack. You hit the dam, you flood the river, the rising water wipes out all the bridges. Literally, all the bridges are wiped out. The troops that are here now have no resupply. And in combat, when you don't have resupply, it's like having a race car and you're racing, but try and run the Indy 500 without a pit stop. What happens to your car?
Gonna break down.
And it just stalls. So that's what happens here. They have guys in fight, but their gas ran out. Their ammunition ran out. Their food ran out. Nothing. They got no resupply, but they don't pause. It's not like you're in combat and you suddenly say, stop. The troops still got to eat. They still got to shoot. The vehicle still got to run. So the engine's still consuming stuff, but you can't resupply it. And they run on empty now. And now they're desperate. These guys are trapped there, and the Russians are just pounding the living dog food out with air power and artillery, and they destroyed it. Those two things were critical for stabilizing the front. And again, when the history's written, these two actions are going to be up there. People are going to study it for years about that. But the Russians still have the ability to strike deep. They're using a different mix of weapons. I think you're seeing strategic bombers coming in and using some old Soviet-era cruise missiles now as a way to supplement the caliber. They burned through their calibers. They burned up a lot of calibers. It's not an infinite supply. This isn't Age of Empire, where you sit there and get to put in a cheat in the program and just the button and build up all your gold. It doesn't work that way. It's reality. You actually got to build the stuff. It takes time. The Russians are building it. They are delivering it. And the other thing we're finding out too with the Russians is, as this war goes on, they're starting to introduce the good stuff. The good weapons. we saw that a little while ago, where suddenly we're seeing videotapes of these precision-guided munitions using TV. We get the TV screen, and it's coming in, and boop, boop, there's the window. There's the surprised face in the window, and then it's dead. I don't know about the face. I'm making that part up. But the window thing, they're introducing a new generation of weaponry. So they're starting to bring this weaponry in and use it. So the Russians, I think everything's under control, but there's a reason for an operational pause, and you don't have an infinite number of calibers. You don't have an infinite number of the Onyx missiles, the coastal defense missiles that are being used to strike deep. You don't have an infinite number of Kinzhal hypersonic missiles. Everybody's like, why don't they Kinzhal this, Kinzhal that? I'm pronouncing that wrong. The Russians are rolling in the grave right now. But because you don't have an infinite quantity of, you're building it up. But remember, Russia has other obligations. Do you really think that the Far East Command, which is preparing for a potential conflict with Japan and the United States over the Kuril Islands, wants to give up all of its precision strike munitions? No, they have a duty and responsibility to meet the mission given to them, and they need a certain amount of military hardware to do it. So you can't rob Peter to pay Paul, and that holds for everywhere else. The periphery is exploding right now. We see Azerbaijan and Armenia fighting. We see fighting between the Kyrgyz and the Tajiks right now. And every one of those has a Russian military resource attached to it in terms of problem solving. And that problem solving has a campaign plan, which is attached to a logistical sustainability plan, which is attached to the availability of the ammunition, fuel, et cetera, all of which cannot be diverted to Ukraine, or else you can't accomplish your mission. So Russia has a lot of stuff, but that a lot of that stuff is allocated already. And so for Ukraine, which was a unplanned, before Ukraine exists, you had military districts. Now Ukraine has created its own military reality, a new military reality that's absorbing stuff, just like when we invaded Afghanistan. Once Afghanistan becomes a reality, we have to start pumping in equipment that wasn't designed for anybody else, just for Afghanistan. The Russians right now, 6 months into this conflict, have to start redevising their long-term logistical sustainability plan that incorporates the new Ukrainian reality. So they have to increase production everywhere and bring it in. And that's what they're doing. That's what this pause is supposed to do. I believe they're going to take full advantage of the wintertime to continue this buildup so that come spring, I think we're going to see the caliber waking up, saying, I'm ready to go in again, boss. Send me in.
So, there's much talk of, we've seen that they hit the power grid, like you said. They're starting to hit critical infrastructure. I've even heard that, the Russians have been kind of hesitant to hit retreating Ukrainian units, and they're starting to do that. Do you think that Russia is going to reclassify the Ukrainian military to a terrorist organization, pretty much, so that they can change their rules of engagement?
The problem with that particular weapon is it's a double-edged sword. Once because Ukraine's been screaming at the top of their lungs, call the Russians terrorists, designate them as terrorists. And Blinken and Sullivan and Biden have all been very smart. One of the few times they've been smart in this whole thing. And they said, no, we're not going to do that. Because here's the deal. If you call the Russians terrorists, they're just not going to talk to you ever again. They'll shut down the embassy. They'll cease all connectivity. And that's the precursor for general war with Russia. And the United States does not want to and has no intention of engaging in a general conflict with Russia over Ukraine. This isn't going to happen. This is not an existential struggle for the United States. It's not even, NATO's making it an existential struggle by committing so much. If I go on vacation to Las Vegas and I saved up, $1,000 and I'm going to go to Las Vegas and I'm going to gamble for 2 nights and all that. If I budgeted that $1,000 and I lose it, that's not an existential struggle for the Ritter household. But if I go to Vegas and I blow the $1,000 on the first night and I max out my credit cards and then I take my mortgage and I take everything and put it all on red, suddenly Vegas became an existential issue for the Ritter household. That's what's happening with NATO right now. They are overcommitting resources to a proposition that they can't win. They will not win in Ukraine. The notion of bleeding Russia dry is foolhardy. It's not going to work. But even if it does work, do you really want that to happen? Because that raises the stakes. Now it becomes an existential struggle for Russia. You want to take the term existential out of this problem for everybody but Ukraine. This is an existential issue for Ukraine, a life or death issue. But Ukraine does not define European security. It does not define global relations. It's not the center of the universe. Ukraine's just another corrupt nation run by neo-Nazis that probably history should resolve. But NATO's turning this into existential. They're overcommitting resources to a losing proposition, and they don't have the ability to back it up. This is problematic, and the United States is eventually going to have to manage that problem. Everybody says the United States had, I saw General Hodges speak the other day, and he said, we're going to have to learn to manage a Russian defeat. What are the consequences of a Russian defeat? Hey, dude, you can make all the PowerPoints you want. Russia ain't losing. But other people are talking about managing a Russian victory. If Russia wins, how do we manage the Russian victory? The United States should start focusing on how do you manage the collapse of NATO, not driven by Russia, but by NATO. When I talk about that, let's look at what's happening right now. Some very interesting things are happening, by the way, on that front. Turkey is talking about going to war against Greece. They're both NATO countries. Now, Turkey's been talking about going to war against Greece forever. Turkey actually won a war against Greece back in the 1970s when they invaded Cyprus. It wasn't a full war, but it was by proxy. Tensions are high. But France has come in and said if Turkey fights Greece, France is coming in on the side of Greece, and now we got us a nice little NATO fight. That's okay because the Germans and the Poles are getting ready to do them one better. The Poles have come out and said, we want Germany to pay us reparations for World War II. And now Scholz has come out and said, if you really want to start digging around in the history books, pal, maybe we're going to think about that border. Think of the fact that you guys are sitting on German territory right now. We still call it Silesia for a reason. All those names, Stettin, that you renamed, it is a German city. You want to play history games? We'll play history games. So Poland and Germany right now are actually making some of the most bellicose statements imaginable. NATO is not a healthy organization at all. There's a real risk of it collapsing, and that risk becomes even more manifest the more NATO overcommits to Ukraine. The United States needs to step in at some point in time and manage this problem. I mean, literally, we need to hit pause for the cause on Ukraine. It's a lost cause. Stop putting the mortgage on it. Don't put the kids' college fund on it. Don't put anything on it. We're done betting on Ukraine. We have to turn to the Poles and the Germans and say, time out. Each one of you to the corners of your room, shut up. Turkey and Greece, stop it. Calm down. Everybody calm down. Let's bring order. But instead, we've instituted economic sanctions against Russian energy that have backfired and are destroying the economic fabric of Europe as we speak. And it's not even cold right now. It's cooling down, but wait till it gets cold. Europe is going to fracture. NATO is going to fracture. The European Union may disappear. There may be revolutions in the street in Europe. Germany may become a revolutionary society because it is the one that has the greatest risk of massive collapse. When you have the German government talking about, coming up with plans to put the army in the streets, you got a problem. Because now you're asking the army to, pull the trigger on starving, hungry, desperate people? History shows us what happens when you ask a military to do that. Remember when the Tsarist regime asked the Tsarist army to fire on the people in the streets? Army switched sides.
Yeah.
Didn't go well for the Tsar. It's not going to go well for Scholz. It's not going to go well for the German foreign minister who said that she doesn't care about the German people and the will of the German people, that she's going to support Ukraine no matter what. This is the kind of suicidal singularity that's going to cause Europe to collapse. In the United States, we need to be managing that. And I say this not from the standpoint of, I think that, American policy is good. This is the proper role of the United States right now. We the Pottery Barn rule, if you break it, you own it. We broke Europe, baby. We broke it. Now we need to come in and see if there's a way that we can glue as many of these pieces back together so that the pot holds water come spring. This is bad time. And the United States is doing the exact wrong thing all the time. The OODA loop applies to diplomacy as well and geopolitical decision-making. Joe Biden is so far back on the OODA loop that he's not going to catch up with all the different revolutionary movements, energy security movements, everything that's going on. They live in a fantasy world. How do we solve the energy problem that we created by sanctioning Russian energy? We're going to sanction them again, and we're going to put a price cap on them. Well, that's not going to work. There's not an energy professional in the world that will tell you that's going to work. It's going to fail and make the matters worse. It's bad times, bad times. Old Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. Man, it's about as interesting as it gets right now.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We're already seeing those demonstrations in the streets of Europe, like you're talking
Yeah,
about. Czech Republic, Germany, France, everywhere. It seems
and
like
it's not even cold yet.
yeah, it's
It's not even cold.
only the beginning. People are still full. They're not hungry.
If you believe in God, and I don't care if your God is a tree God, a nature God, the God, a God, he God, she God, whatever you want to call it, start praying, baby,
Hmm.
for a warm winter. And I mean that for everybody. I know there's some pro-Russian people out there saying, I want the coldest winter possible. No, you don't. Russia's going to emerge from this looking pretty good no matter what. But it's not in Russia's best interest to have Europe collapse. And it's not in humanity's best interest to have Europe collapse. Europe has an important role to play in the world today. We need a stable Europe. Um, I'm not a fan of European political elite, but I'm not a fan of unqualified revolutionary change either. It's better to dance with the devil you know than the demon you don't. Um, we need the warmest winter possible for the least harm possible on Europe, so that uh, they can manage their way through this problem. If it's a cold winter, there's dark times for the world.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on. It seems like the West is trying to force Russia into going into general mobilization. You know, you see what's going on with. First, we had Kosovo and Serbia a couple weeks ago, and
Yeah,
now Georgia is talking about holding a referendum on declaring war on Russia, and
yeah.
Armenia and Azerbaijan are flaring up again. It seems so obvious to anyone who's informed that this is the West trying to force Russia to somewhat overextend itself or go into general mobilization. Would you agree?
Well, I look. Let's answer this two ways. I know for a fact. I can't say I know for a fact. Um, I strongly believe that in Langley, Virginia, there's a organization whose job it is to screw up the entire world. That's their job. They do political direct action. They do information warfare because the CIA is there as a disruptive force to disrupt the world to benefit the United States. That's a large part of what their covert action is. We buy off politicians. We steal elections. That's what we do. Um, and they are sitting there, and they, you know, there's a CIA station just about everywhere in the world that deals with every part of the world, and they have plans to create chaos and anarchy where it benefits the United States. But chaos and anarchy isn't invented in a vacuum. And what I mean by that is, let's take Azerbaijan and Armenia. The CIA can push an issue in the direction that the issue wants to go, but it's very difficult for the CIA to get it to go 100. Azerbaijan and Iran